Welcome back to Altally Car, the channel where we explore the hidden stories behind global events, power struggles, and the people who shape history. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the world's most complex conflicts. Today, we're uncovering a story that shaped the Middle East and echoed across the entire world. This is the story of how Bashar al-Assad lost Syria and ultimately escaped to Russia. When the Arab Spring erupted in 2011, the fire of revolution swept across North Africa and the Middle East. In Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, longtime rulers were toppled by massive popular uprisings. Ordinary citizens, young and old, men and women, filled the streets demanding dignity, freedom, and an end to decades of dictatorship. In Syria, those same calls for reform and justice soon echoed in the streets of Daraa, Damascus, and Homs. Protesters carried olive branches and chanted for democracy, never imagining the brutal crackdown that would soon follow. Bashar al-Assad, the son of longtime Syrian ruler Hafez al-Assad, had inherited a regime built on fear, intelligence services, and military loyalty. When demonstrations began in 2011, many hoped that Assad, a Western-educated ophthalmologist, might choose dialogue over violence. Instead, his government responded with live ammunition, mass arrests, and torture. Videos of children being detained and beaten shocked the world and fueled the anger of the Syrian people. What began as peaceful protests quickly spiraled into a nationwide uprising. By 2012, Syria had descended into full-scale civil war. Opposition groups armed themselves, forming loose coalitions ranging from defected army officers to local militias. The Free Syrian Army emerged as a banner for rebels, but coordination was weak. Islamist factions gained ground, some backed by Gulf states, while Kurdish forces in the north seized the chance to build their own autonomous administration. Syria became a patchwork of competing forces, with Assad's government losing territory at alarming speed. For Assad, the key to survival was control of Damascus, the capital, and the coastal regions where his Alawite base of support lived. But as the war dragged on, even those areas came under threat. Rebel advances brought fighting to the heart of Damascus. Car bombs exploded near government buildings. Mortar shells landed close to the presidential palace. Entire neighborhoods of Aleppo, Homs, and Idlib slipped from government hands. For the first time in decades, the Assad regime was on the verge of collapse. The international stage further complicated the war. The United States and its allies condemned Assad's brutality, imposing sanctions and offering limited support to rebel factions. Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and Qatar funneled money and weapons to Islamist groups, while Turkey opened its borders to refugees and opposition fighters. Meanwhile, Iran and Hezbollah stood firmly behind Assad, sending advisors, weapons, and fighters. Still, despite Iranian support, Assad was bleeding territory and legitimacy. The turning point came in 2013 with the use of chemical weapons in Ghouta. Images of children gasping for air after a sarin gas attack horrified the world. Western governments accused Assad's forces of carrying out the atrocity, though Damascus denied responsibility. President Barack Obama had warned that the use of chemical weapons would cross a red line. Many expected U.S. airstrikes to follow, but instead, through a deal brokered by Russia, Assad agreed to surrender his declared chemical weapons stockpiles in exchange for avoiding direct American military intervention. For Assad, this was a lifeline, but it also marked the beginning of a deeper dependency on Moscow. By 2014, ISIS had risen from the chaos, capturing vast swaths of territory in eastern Syria and Iraq. The world's attention shifted from Assad's crackdown on rebels to the shocking brutality of ISIS. Beheadings, mass executions, and propaganda videos dominated headlines. The U.S.-led coalition launched airstrikes against ISIS, weakening the extremist group but indirectly relieving pressure on Assad. Still, rebel groups and Islamist factions continued to tighten the noose around his regime. By 2015, Assad controlled less than 20% of Syria. His army was exhausted, suffering massive desertions and relying increasingly on foreign militias. Entire cities had fallen, and it seemed only a matter of time before Damascus itself would be overwhelmed. This was the moment Assad turned fully to Russia. In September 2015, Russia launched a military intervention in Syria, deploying air power, advisors, and advanced weaponry. Russian jets bombed rebel positions, targeting not only ISIS but also Western-backed opposition groups. Moscow framed its intervention as a fight against terrorism, but its true purpose was clear: to preserve Assad's regime as a client state and secure Russia's only Mediterranean naval base at Tartus. The Russian intervention changed the course of the war. With airstrikes pounding rebel supply lines and Russian advisors reorganizing the Syrian army, Assad's forces slowly regained ground. Cities like Aleppo were retaken after brutal sieges that left entire districts in ruins. Barrel bombs, chemical attacks, and relentless artillery fire forced millions of Syrians to flee their homes. The refugee crisis spilled into Europe, reshaping politics across the continent. Assad, once seen as a dictator on the verge of collapse, was suddenly back in the game thanks to Vladimir Putin, but this survival came at a cost. Assad had effectively mortgaged Syria's sovereignty to foreign powers. Iran's militias patrolled Syrian cities, Russia controlled the skies and dictated major military campaigns. Damascus was no longer the independent capital of a sovereign state, but a dependent client of Moscow and Tehran. In the eyes of many Syrians, Assad had not saved the country, he had lost it. Fast forward to the late 2010s and early 2020s, Assad remained in power, but presided over a shattered nation. More than half of Syria's population had been displaced. Cities lay in ruins, the economy collapsed under sanctions and war damage. Large parts of the north remained outside government control, held by Kurdish forces or Turkish-backed rebels. ISIS, though weakened, lingered in the desert. Corruption and poverty spread like wildfire. The Assad regime survived, but Syria as a functioning state was gone. Behind the scenes, Assad's personal security became increasingly tied to Russia. His visits to Moscow revealed a strange dynamic. He was often summoned to Russia rather than hosting Putin in Damascus. Photographs showed him waiting in corridors, overshadowed by Russian generals, or meeting Putin in symbolic displays of who truly held power. For a man who once inherited his father's throne with the aura of absolute authority, this dependence on foreign protectors highlighted just how much he had lost. There are multiple accounts suggesting that Assad has quietly relocated family members and assets to Russia, ensuring that if the regime falls, he has a safe haven abroad. Moscow has offered not just military support, but also the possibility of exile. While Assad still appears publicly in Damascus, his long-term security is deeply intertwined with Russian protection. The war that began with Syrians demanding dignity and reform ended with a dictator clinging to power only through foreign sponsorship. So did Assad really win? On paper, he remains president of Syria, but the reality tells a different story. He presides over ruins, a collapsed economy, and a fragmented state. He relies on Russia and Iran for his very survival. Millions of Syrians will never return home. In many ways, Assad did not save Syria, he lost it, and in the process, he secured only his own escape route to Moscow, where his future may ultimately lie. The story of Bashar al-Assad is not just about one man. It is about how authoritarian regimes cling to power at any cost, even if it means destroying their country. It is about how global powers use local conflicts to expand influence, turning nations into battlegrounds for their rivalries. And it is about the resilience of ordinary people who continue to demand freedom even in the face of overwhelming violence. As we reflect on how Assad lost Syria and turned to Russia, the question remains, what comes next? Will Russia maintain its grip over Damascus indefinitely, or will new regional dynamics reshape the future of Syria? Will Syrians ever reclaim their right to determine their own destiny, free from foreign interventions and authoritarian rule? Only time will tell. Thank you for watching this episode of al-Assad. If you found this deep dive informative, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And let us know in the comments what topics you'd like us to cover next. Until then, stay informed and see you in the next video.